Hello, and welcome to the Behavior Contract module of the Strategic Behavioral Intervention series. My name is Crystal Keith, and I'm a program specialist with the El Dorado County Office of Education SELPA and Charter SELPA. The Strategic Behavioral Intervention series is composed of 8 online modules. Each module will focus on a specific behavioral intervention in order to support you and your staff with successful implementation. Today's topic is behavior contracts. However, the 7 additional topics which will be available for viewing are provided here for your reference. Strategic interventions are focused, research-based, academic, and/or behavioral interventions. As Tier 2 and occasionally Tier 3 interventions, they are an essential element of multi-tiered system of supports and response to intervention and instruction. It's important to remember that when implementing strategic interventions, that a referral and exit process is determined prior to implementation. Due to the individualized nature of these interventions, parent permission is also required. In today's topic on behavior contracts, our goal is to provide you with core components of successful behavior contracts, how to adjust to support all age levels, how to collect data for effectiveness, how to overcome potential pitfalls, as well as provide resources for future use. To review, our goal is to provide you with the who, what, when, where, and how of creating behavior contracts. Let's begin with answering the question, what is a behavior contract? A behavior contract is a brief written document of agreement between a staff member or members, the student, and possibly the family. Whenever possible, a behavior contract should be limited to 1 page. This contract documents behavioral goals in clear and observable terms, as well as the responsibilities of all participants, including staff. It lists positive rewards and consequences for behavior, as well as outlines how data collection will take place. It's essential that a review date or an end date is also determined and included in the contract to support an accountability for follow-through and continued monitoring. We will review all of these steps in more detail when we discuss the implementation steps. However, let's first discuss why a behavioral contract may be selected as an intervention. Now that we've discussed what a behavioral contract is, let's review why it may be a valuable tool. Behavior contracts are a practical and creative way for teachers, staff, and parents to help students of all ages improve skills in various areas, including classroom and social behavior, school attendance, or work completion, just to name a few. That said, a behavior contract may be written to support skills in any desired area. When implemented consistently and with fidelity, a successful behavior contract may also support student accountability, provide structure, routine, consistency, and organization through a written format of expectations, promote self-responsibility, improve student buy-in and behavioral interventions, increase student motivation and effort, or improve school-home communication. A behavior contract may also decrease power struggles between staff and students by providing an agreed-upon third point from which agreements have already been made. For example, a staff member can refer the student to the contract which they've agreed upon instead of engaging in a verbal dialogue regarding behavioral expectations. With those benefits in mind, let's now discuss who may be a good candidate for a behavior contract. Although a behavior contract may be successful with any student, they're especially helpful for students who require support and organization, who may benefit from reminders and goal setting, who display persistent behavioral challenges or have trouble getting started on tasks, or students who respond well to rewards or praise. Now that we know who may benefit most from this intervention, when might it be appropriate to create a behavior contract with the student? Behavior contracts can be a useful tool to implement when class-wide or school-wide systems of behavioral support are no longer adequate in supporting the student, when you're initiating a reward system, or when you're revisiting an ineffective system, when setting new goals related to new replacement behaviors, when a third point is needed to avoid power struggles, or when communicating expectations to students, staff, and parents. With that in mind, in which setting might a behavior contract be most appropriate? Behavior contracts can support behavioral or academic success in any setting. It may be written for the entire school day, a specific class or subject, a specific time or activity, or interaction such as lunch, recess, passing period, bus behavior, drop-off and pickup, or morning routine. Behavior contracts may support homework completion, returning homework, or outlining and supporting behaviors needed to interact respectfully with staff. Whenever possible, collaborate with the family to build a strong contract that works across settings. It's recommended to only include actions completed by parents after their informed participation and commitment to consistent follow-through. Now that we've reviewed the who, what, when, where, and why of effective behavior contracts, let's talk about how to implement this strategic intervention. It's recommended that you follow these 5 steps for successful development of a behavior contract, each of which will be reviewed in more detail in future slides. First, define the replacement behavior or behaviors in a clear and concise manner. Next, identify meaningful reinforcement or rewards, as well as clear consequences for undesired behavior. After the replacement behaviors, meaningful rewards, and clear consequences have been identified, it's essential to define expectations of all involved stakeholders, the student, staff, and family. For example, what are the responsibilities of the student? How will staff members or parents support in the student's success? How will behavioral change be monitored and shared with the student? Where will the contract be kept? Deciding on these questions and the type of data that will be kept, as well as when it will be taken and by whom, should also be done at this time. As stated previously, it's essential that a review date or an end date is also included in the contract to support an accountability and monitoring. After all stakeholders have collaborated to complete these steps and the contract is written, review the contract with the student and obtain signatures of agreement from the student, staff, and if appropriate, the parent. Now that we've provided an overview of the steps to successful implementation, let's talk about each step in more detail. The first is to define the replacement behavior or behaviors in a clear and concise manner. To do this, prioritize problematic behaviors if there are multiple, to allow the contract to focus on only 1 to 3 behaviors. After those have been selected, determine an appropriate replacement behavior to teach or request instead of the identified problem behavior. Describe the appropriate behavior you'd like to see the student demonstrate in brief, concrete, and measurable terms. It's important to list what the student should be doing instead, and not only list the behaviors you'd like to see decrease. Learning a replacement behavior is like any new academic skill or life skill and will require teaching, modeling, and practice opportunities to increase the likelihood for success. The amount of teaching which may be required will depend on the student's age, developmental level, and the replacement behavior. Therefore, it's important to individualize your approach each time you create a new behavior contract. As stated previously, it's essential to be clear about the expected behaviors within the contract. This sometimes requires a shift in thinking to consistently ask for what behavior you'd like to see instead of what you'd like not to see. Here's an example of what to say and what not to say. Instead of saying, "I'll stop being disrespectful when I get frustrated," do say, "When I feel frustrated, I'll ask for help or I'll ask for a break." Then, have a conversation with the student about how they'll ask for help appropriately or how to ask for a break, what can be done during the break, or how long the break will be. Here is another example of what to say. Instead of writing into a contract that I will stop hitting, you may choose to write, "I will keep my hands in my bubble," or "I will squeeze my fidget if I feel anxious." Depending on the function of the hitting behavior, the replacement may change. Then, teach the student how to use the new skill, including modeling and practice opportunities, and reinforce often. Now that the behaviors have been identified, it's time to set up reward systems as well as possible consequences. A brief note about consequences. Although they are included, it's recommended to keep the plan as positive as possible. If you notice you are providing more consequences than rewards, it may be time to meet to review and restructure your contract. Back to reinforcement. In order for reinforcement to work, it must be anchored in meaning, provided immediately following the desired behavior, varied in options, and provided consistently across settings. It's important that the contract is set up for success to allow the student to experience the positive benefits of using the replacement behavior early and often, which will also increase motivation to continue when the student becomes discouraged. When choosing a reinforcement tool, read student cues, such as what activities do you observe the child frequently choosing to engage in. Other staff members and parents may also be valuable contributors to this process. Perhaps the most valuable contributor, however, is the student themselves. You can complete a reinforcement interview or provide a survey if the student does not respond to the interview format. Let's take a look at a couple examples of interviews and surveys. Here are some examples of reinforcement surveys for different grade levels. On the left is an elementary example and includes a straightforward group of questions regarding favorite things. This could be provided to the student to fill out themselves or completed in an interview format. The example in the middle could also be used for an elementary student or reformatted for a middle schooler. In addition to favorite things, this form poses general questions including what the student would do if they had $1 million, or what would make school better, which allows for a deeper look into what may motivate the student. Lastly, the form on the right is an upper grade interest inventory, which includes questions about goals, hobbies, and other items of interest. These are intended only as examples which could be adjusted for any grade or age level to meet your needs. Generally speaking, they're intended to illustrate all of the ways in which you can include the student in the process of identifying rewards. Similarly, you may also wish to involve the student in identifying appropriate consequences if needed. Feel free to be creative when considering student feedback and deciding on reinforcement. Here, we've provided some additional ideas of types of reinforcement for your use to illustrate how varied reinforcement can be. For this reason, it's essential to collaborate with your student to find out what works for him or her, as well as the family, for the best buy-in. Don't forget to offer choices whenever possible, and praise outside of agreed upon rewards, including high fives or compliments, or sharing successes with others in the child's company. Please take a moment now to review these additional reinforcement ideas and how they may be used or adjusted to support your student. Occasionally, staff members or parents feel as though providing a student with reinforcement for expected behavior is similar to bribing the student to do what they should already be doing. Therefore, let's take a brief moment to examine the differences between an incentive and a bribe. Incentives are planned, purposeful, and provided for desired behaviors in order to teach and reinforce new skills. Providing intentional incentives or rewards increases the student's ability to learn and generalize a new, appropriate skill for use in both the school setting and in their community. Conversely, a bribe is often reactive, unplanned, and offered to stop an undesired behavior. This often reinforces the undesired behavior the child was displaying prior to receiving the bribe. To review, the staff member's goal in providing the reinforcement is to support the student in using appropriate behavior, which allows him or her to participate meaningfully in school and beyond. As stated previously, the goal is that the behavior contract and reinforcement plan will remain positive. However, there may be instances in which consequences are also required. Just as was the case with reinforcement planning, it will be important to clearly communicate which behaviors will earn a consequence and what the consequence may be. This should be communicated to all stakeholders, including the student. Again, if you notice that you're providing more consequences than reinforcement, it may be time to revisit the contract to ensure that the reinforcement is meaningful, varied, immediate, and consistent. This is essential to the success of your plan. Behavior contracts may require a trial and error period, which is to be expected. Support your team members to avoid discouragement, and don't be afraid to adjust the contract as needed for success. Now that reinforcement has been selected, it's time to define the roles and expectations of those included in the contract. Here's a wonderful example from interventioncentral.com which illustrates how clearly defined roles and expectations can be included directly into a behavior contract in different ways. At the top of the contract, the expectations of both the teacher and student are listed. It's the teacher's role to give Ricky, the student, a sticker when he displays one of the following clearly defined replacement behaviors. Providing a sticker each time Ricky completes the replacement behavior allows for immediate positive feedback, which is very motivating. Then, once he has received 12 stickers, he has the choice of 3 predetermined reinforcement opportunities. This is an excellent example of providing varied choices for rewards based on student interest. There's a bonus option for a perfect week, as well as clear predetermined consequences. Below, there are signature lines for each participant. Above their signature is yet another clear delineation of the expectations for each individual. Ricky agrees that he has helped to create the agreement and understands and agrees to the terms. Mrs. Jones agrees to carry out her part of the agreement, that Ricky will receive stickers when he fulfills his daily behavioral goals of completing homework and classwork, and will also be allowed to collect his reward when he has earned enough stickers for it. Miss Jones will also be sure that Ricky gets his bonus prize if he earns it. There's also a clear expectation of the parent. The parent of Ricky agrees to check over his homework assignments each evening to make sure that he completes them. They will also ask Ricky about his daily work completion and his behavior at school. Parents will provide Ricky with daily encouragement, as well as sign his classroom hero chart each time he brings it home with 12 stickers on it. We will discuss data collection in a moment. However, you can see in this example that data collection is completed by simply counting the stickers earned each day, as well as counting the occasions that Ricky earns the reinforcement or the bonus reinforcement. Although the content of this plan is more elementary in nature, the general format can be easily adjusted to meet the needs of your student at any age or developmental level. This example was typed. However, you may wish to have the student handwrite or type the contract with the support of a staff member. As mentioned previously, it's important that staff determine which data collection method will be utilized for monitoring the behavior contract. In order to determine this, first consider what behavior led to the development of the contract in the first place. This will assist the team in selecting the method of data collection from the list below. Essentially, your data should seek to answer one or more of the following questions. Frequency data will give you information about how often a behavior occurs, whereas duration will tell you how long the behavior may last. A scatter plot will tell you when the behavior occurs, and an ABC chart examines the antecedent, behavior, and consequence in observable terms in order to answer the question of why the behavior occurs. Essentially, a staff member would write the behavior and a short description of what happened right before and right afterward. Additionally, you may choose to use existing data such as work completion, attendance, or office referrals, or more specific behaviors like calling out or being out of the seat. The opportunities are endless, but as a reminder, only take the data you will need to determine the effectiveness of your contract. Once you've selected the type of data you'd like to monitor, then develop a simple plan to do so, including how, when, where data will be kept, and who will be monitoring. This can be included directly into the plan, however, keep it simple and student-centered whenever possible. If needed, a separate piece of paper with more complex staff instructions for data collection may be developed for staff reference. In planning for data collection and introducing collection methods to others, it's important to consider and remind staff of the value of taking the time to collect reliable data in an already hectic school day. Let's take the example of a 25% off sale. For most, that would be enough to get them through the door of a store. Behavior is really no different. Let's say that Johnny threw his pencil on average 20 times per day. After the intervention, he threw his pencil an average of only 15 times per day. Without data, 15 times may not feel like a success. However, the data illustrates a 25% decrease in the behavior, which is certainly a success. Just as we discussed the importance of reinforcing students, seeing the proof of the behavioral decrease and the positive outcomes of their hard work is extremely reinforcing for staff and parents. This, in turn, increases the likelihood of the intervention continuing even in more challenging times. Remember, only take the data that you need and make your data work for you. As stated previously, you may also choose to use already existing data methods to monitor progress. You may do this through monitoring number of earned rewards, office referrals, work or homework completion, or attendance data. Now that you've clearly defined the expectations of all stakeholders, as well as how data will be collected and used, it's now time to determine an agreed upon review and/or end date for your contract, as well as to review the plan with the student and obtain signatures. Determining a review or end date will not only support in setting a timeline for goals included in the contract, but it will also minimize the risk of the disappearing contract. In addition to when it will be reviewed, also include how it will be done. Will your contract be reviewed in a formal or an informal meeting, in an email or a note home, or will it be reviewed via phone call? Once you've determined this, your contract is now complete and it's time to obtain signatures and agreement. Don't forget to obtain parent signature as well if a home component is included. Once signed, provide a copy to the student if appropriate, and then assist the student in deciding where it will be kept. Then, agree upon a confidential place where an additional copy may be kept for future reference. Congratulations, the contract is now complete. All that is left to do is to implement as written in the plan, collect the predetermined data, and review on the date that you've selected, if not sooner. As an additional consideration, age adjustments may need to be made when you're writing behavior contracts. There are some common elements, however, across age and developmental levels, such as including the student in development and in choosing rewards, explicitly teaching the replacement behavior or behaviors, and limiting the contract to as few pages as possible, not to exceed 2 pages. That said, you may wish to differentiate the type of contract to allow either a written format for older students or a visual picture format for younger students. You may also wish to allow older students to author their contract themselves, so that they are responsible for typing or handwriting the contract as you develop it together. You may also differentiate the time period in which reinforcement is provided. Older students may be successful with longer periods of time before reinforcement is provided. However, if this is attempted and found not to be the case for the individual student, it's recommended to increase the frequency as soon as possible to avoid a loss of buy-in with the plan on behalf of the student who never experiences its success. Lastly, you may wish to adjust the method of teaching the replacement behavior. For example, older students may or may not be comfortable engaging in role play and may prefer talking through the expectations and watching an adult model the expected behavior. As is the case with any strategic intervention, there are potential pitfalls in planning and implementation. To support you in realistically preparing for these possible challenges, the next several slides will present potential pitfalls as well as corresponding strategies to overcome them. With that in mind, the first potential pitfall one may encounter is that the contract is no longer motivating and therefore has stopped working. First, do not allow an ineffective contract to continue. If this occurs, return to the planning stages with all stakeholders, including the student, to ensure that rewards are meaningful to the student, motivating, and provided consistently. Then, consider whether they should be earned more frequently to allow the student to experience success, as mentioned on the previous slide. You may also wish to adjust goals to allow more time for them to be attained. Next, reconsider skill deficits and whether or not replacement skills should be retaught or taught in a different area. Lastly, collaborate with the student to rewrite the contract. By doing this, instead of allowing the contract to simply disappear or remain ineffective, you're showing the student that they have value and that his or her success is worth the time needed to develop an effective and reasonable plan. The next potential pitfall is associated with responding to claims that that's not fair. Occasionally, when a behavior contract or a reinforcement system is implemented for a specific student, other students may feel that it's not fair that the student receive rewards that they may not receive. If this occurs, It may be important to remind students and potentially staff members that fair isn't everyone getting the same thing. Fair is everyone getting what they need in order to be successful. This is the difference between equality and equity. Individual students' needs are not equal, just as the animal's abilities illustrated in the cartoon on the left are not equal and will therefore require different accommodations to complete the task of climbing the tree. Equity allows all students to get what they need in order to successfully access and complete a given task. Ultimately, the goal of a behavior contract or any other strategic behavioral intervention is to level the playing field, so to speak, to allow all students meaningful access to their education. This may be an important reminder to students or staff when implementing individualized interventions. Additional potential pitfalls may include labeling, lack of staff consistency, use of short-term extrinsic rewards which are no longer motivating, lack of data collection, lack of goal setting, or missing a review and/or end date. I'd like to invite you now to take a moment to pause this module and allow yourself time to review or jot down notes on the possible solutions to each of these potential pitfalls. Please keep in mind that additional information regarding stakeholder discouragement or a lack of buy-in are presented on the next slide. Hopefully you had an opportunity to stop and review the previous 6 potential pitfalls and possible solutions. Lack of stakeholder buy-in or stakeholder discouragement are amongst the most common challenges in consistently implementing a strategic behavioral intervention. For that reason, it's essential to include all stakeholders in the development of the contract, including having each person present as it's written to allow for visual and verbal agreement. Promises should never be made on behalf of an absent stakeholder unless input and agreement was obtained beforehand. Even then, full participation is recommended for maximizing success. If stakeholders become discouraged, it's important to remind one another that challenging behavior is in fact very challenging, and although it may get worse before it gets better, the time spent planning and teaching a student replacement skills proactively will always be more controlled and beneficial for all involved parties than continuing to respond in a reactionary manner. Either way, challenging behavior will take time from staff members. However, by spending the time proactively rather than reactively, everyone wins. The staff feels prepared, less anxious, and supported. And students also feel supported through opportunities to learn new skills, which are reinforced accordingly. Lastly, don't forget to reinforce staff and parents also, either using data, as described earlier, or using verbal praise and encouragement. This helps all stakeholders feel supported throughout the process of implementing a behavior contract or any other strategic behavioral intervention. Here we've provided you with some additional resources for strategic behavioral interventions. PBIS World lists a host of intervention ideas related to specific behavioral challenges. They also offer free data tracking tools. Similarly, Intervention Central also provides a large library of tools and resources for numerous academic and behavioral needs, including behavioral contracts. Lastly, Electronic Daily Report Card is a free online resource for tracking data and reporting to staff members and families. Thank you for joining us for the Behavior Contracts module from the Strategic Behavioral Intervention series. We hope that you'll be able to use the information provided in this module to better plan for and implement meaningful and effective behavior contracts. We're always here to help, so please don't hesitate to contact a program specialist if you have additional questions. Also, we encourage you to access our other strategic behavioral intervention modules for more intervention ideas as they become available. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.